What if I told you that you might be pitching investors all wrong? And why would I make that claim? Well, this is based upon my observation of watching hundreds of founders pitch hundreds of investors and listening to investor feedback and watching which founders get funded and which don't. So in this video, I'm going to take my experiences and everything I've learned and show you the one mindset shift that I think you need to make to pitch investors successfully. For me, this mindset shift works every single time because I've used it and it's helped me become a successful founder. I've been funded 7 times and I've had 2 exits. So stick around. I'm going to break it down for you because in a lot of the other videos, I keep sharing techniques, but this one, it's going to be a mindset and how you lay the foundation, the psychological foundation to make sure you can build on top of it for founder success. Before we continue, my name is Ed Kang, and if we met before, use the chapter markers to skip right ahead to the video. I've made it as easy as possible for you. You are welcome. If we haven't met, I'm a 7-time funded founder with 2 exits, and that's just a fancy way of saying I failed a bunch of times to your benefit because I like to use YouTube videos like this and my channel to help founders, especially early stage founders, raise early stage funding, avoid some of the catastrophic mistakes that I've made. Not to say you're not going to make mistakes, but I'm going to try to make your life a little bit easier because it's hard enough as it is. I'm also the Chief Strategy Officer for Startups.com, and if you're from Startups.com, thank you so much for being part of the community. If not, go check us out. A lot of free resources on our site. And while you're here, like, comment, subscribe, do the YouTube thing. Your feedback is tremendously appreciated. Let's look into the mindset required to pitch investors successfully. All founders typically start off by saying, my idea is good and will make you money. And that totally makes sense. It's a great way to approach it. If you acknowledge that the investor needs to make money, you can say, my idea is good. What do you think? Let's make some money together. And a lot of founders ignore the fact that investors want to make money, but we're going to take for granted that you understand this, you accept it. That's your approach. But I think this approach misses something fundamentally important to the investor because the investor is thinking, are you good enough to execute on any idea and make me money? We've established that making money is going to be the baseline here. But notice how it says execute on any idea, not just your idea, on any idea. And that is what the investor is thinking. And the reason for this is pretty straightforward. There's a principle here. Investors invest in founders, not in companies. And you might be thinking, but Ed, I've heard this over and over again. It's cliche by now. But let's examine this a little further. I listened to a story about a founder that got accepted in a Y Combinator. And Y Combinator says flat out, we optimize for the founder, not for the idea. And this founder said that they were accepted in a Y Combinator, but not for the idea that they had originally pitched. Y Combinator actually said to them, we like you, you're in, tell us another idea that you want to work on. And if you have that, then we want you as part of our batch. That's a perfect example of Y Combinator standing behind what they say. They're more interested in the founder than the idea. Because so many times founders pivot their ideas during Y Combinator. What they start off with is not what they pitch in demo day, and I've seen this happen countless times. There's an expression out there that says invest in the jockey, not the horse. In this case, the jockey is the founder and the horse is a startup. And so many times founders are saying invest in the horse. But the investor thinks to themselves, well, what if that's not the horse that you finish the race with? What if the horse breaks a leg or gets sick, or you need to find a better horse or a different horse? The horse runs in the wrong direction. The investor starts to think to themselves, well, I know that the founder is typically wrong. There's very few cases where the founder has been right out of the gate. And there's going to be lots of pivots in different directions, and that happens all the time, especially in Y Combinator. But let's expand to the rest of the startup ecosystem. Historically speaking, we've got some really big examples out there. Instagram did not start off as the photo sharing app that it is now. It started off completely different, and the founder was so frustrated with that not working, they decided, hey, we're going to do Instagram, we're going to share pictures with filters, and the rest is history. Then there's Slack. Slack started off as a video game communication tool, and they were B2C, and now they're B2B, working with enterprise, and look how valuable Slack is. Airbnb is another great example, but I'm going to save that example for later. Let's talk about Pinterest. Originally, Pinterest was an app where you could go and get reminders of the stuff that you want to buy online. And one of the most drastic pivots that we've seen has to do with Twitter. Back in the day, it was a podcast discovery app, not the Twitter that we know with the blue birds and the tweets. And then that changed to X, and now it's XAI. So you could say there's been multiple pivots. Those are just some of the really great examples to explain why investors invest in the founder, not in the company. And that's because every startup pivots to various degrees. You don't necessarily pivot to a completely new industry. Let's get back to Airbnb. They started off by saying this is going to be air mattresses in somebody's apartment, and then after investor, you're going to serve them breakfast as a host. Not the Airbnb that we know today, but it's been in the same vein this entire time. But there has been iterations, these micro pivots, and that's what every founder should expect to do, and investors know this. I got this comment on one of my posts on Reddit, and it says, Richard is a venture partner in one of the most active funds in the Southeast by number of deals. Over the past 15 years, they've had 45 profitable exits. That's a pretty good track record. They recently decided to look at the original decks of those exits to see what they had in common when they pitched. They did, in fact, all have one thing in common. None of them were doing what they originally intended to, zero. You may think, no, that's not going to be me. I'm not going to pivot. But how do you know? There are things you don't know. And investors want you to acknowledge that and have the ability to execute should you have to adapt. That's why you have to demonstrate that you can execute on any idea. Sure, you might have domain expertise and experience in one, but who knows where you're going to end up if you can find a way to get product market fit through multiple iterations or even drastic pivots. Investors want you to do that. They do not care that you are in love with your idea and you have conviction and that's your baby. They care about their money and de-risking their investment. So show them that you are an execution machine, that you are relentlessly resourceful, that you are so passionate about solving problems and that you're willing to look at the data and take a reality bat right to the face and say, we need to adapt or we're going to die. And execution is the foundation for all of that to occur. Without execution, there is nothing. Take a look at this quote. A great startup idea is worth its weight in gold, but without execution, ideas weigh absolutely nothing. I took the liberty of asking ChatGPT 4o to make a nice little poster to illustrate my quote here. Here's another one for you. A startup vision without execution is nothing more than a founder's daydream and an investor's worst nightmare. And I can tell you, as working in VC and being an investor, the last thing I want to be guilty of as an investor is investing in an idea because I liked it and not having any execution for it to go absolutely nowhere. That is a horrible feeling and is enough to keep you up late at night. Are founders executing? If you're thinking, nah, Ed, that's not me, great. I hope that's the case. But I can tell you, how many founders have I met that have had amazing ideas? They've validated, they've done customer discovery, they know the idea, but they refuse to execute. Or when they hit a little bit of resistance, they stop executing completely. They stop trying different things. They get stuck doing one thing over and over again, expecting different results, as they say is the definition of insanity. We're insane as investors to give money to those types of founders. You can talk a good game all day long and tell me how your idea is worth so much. It's the next $1 trillion idea, but how do I know that you can make it into a reality? How do I know unless you show me execution? And that's why investors look for founders that demonstrate their proclivity for action. Don't pitch investors on your idea alone. You want to pitch them on your execution using your idea like a case study. The idea starts the conversation because getting an idea to the point where it's validated is part of execution. It shows you've executed enough to say, hey, we think this is a good idea. But also show them that this is not just the only thing that we'd be willing to execute on. This is just a great example of our execution in progress. In addition, if you want to bolster your cause further, then show them that you can execute even before getting any funding. It really sucks from an investor standpoint to listen to a founder and say, we are not going to be able to do anything until we get money. That is not what the investor wants to hear at all. As I've said multiple times on this channel, funding is not the beginning of your startup, nor is it the end goal. You should not wait for funding to begin executing on your idea, and nor do you go on easy mode and say, once I get the funding, I don't have to execute anymore. In fact, the pressure intensifies to an exponential degree where execution becomes even that much more important, which is why the founder needs to demonstrate to the investor you can execute ahead of time so they don't worry about you having that problem when the chips are down, when the pressure's on. What does this look like? This means being consistent, consistently sending investor updates, consistently moving towards your goals, staying in the game as long as possible, even before funding. It's about momentum. How fast can you launch your ideas and get it out there in front of the customer? If you've been waiting for so long, just like many founders do, where you wait, then you launch, and then nobody cares, and you wasted all this time and resources to try and perfect your launch, that's a sign for investors. You don't understand how this startup game works. It's completely different than being a small business. Let's say you're opening a Subway franchise. You go out there and say, I'm going to buy a Subway franchise, and they say, great, here's your system in a box, here's what you do, here's how you make subs, open up, we're going to train you, make some subs, make some money. Done. very predictable. And that's the power of a franchise. And there's nothing wrong with opening a boring business like that. I've got boring businesses in my portfolio and I love them to death because doing a startup is infinitely harder than doing a regular business. The difference between being an entrepreneur and a wantrepreneur is the ability to execute. But the difference between being an entrepreneur and a startup founder is the speed in which you are willing to execute. If you came to me and said, hey, I got 1 million users and I launched this product and it took me 5 years to do it, I'd be like, congratulations, you've got a wonderful small business. But what startup investors are looking for is for you to tell them, listen, we got our first customer right out of the gate within like 1 month of launching. And now we're growing 10% week over week. You don't have to have 1 million customers. Let's say you have 1,000 customers, but you're growing 10% week over week. That's the type of momentum investors are looking for. Let's talk about AI for a moment. Going out and creating a great demo to show investors is not enough anymore. Investors are saying, great, you can build an AI as a demo. Anybody can pretty much build those these days. And I'm being reductive. It's not that easy, but it's getting a lot easier. They say, go out and get a paying customer and tell me what you've learned from that paying customer. Which brings us to our next point, and that's the insights. The faster you get out there and the more consistent you are, the more insights that you're going to glean from the market. You're going to get that feedback faster than spending all that time and wasting all those resources building the wrong thing. And that's what the investor wants to hear. They want to know what you're learning as you go along, which ultimately leads to sell before you build. If you can sell something, you can tell the investor, yeah, I've got validation of my idea because someone's already bought it. Someone's pre-committed to it. Someone's agreed to the price. I don't have to worry about that. I now just need the runway to go build it. The hard part is over in the selling. And I'm not saying building is easy. I'm saying that too many times people build first and then they hit the wall and they stop executing. So show that execution up front in the investor's mind. Show them that mindset that you're not willing to leave it to chance and that you're going to execute against your idea even before you get funded. And that might mean you have to get creative with your MVP, but that's okay. The more creative you are, the more you de-risk the investment, the more you send those signals to the investor that you're the founder that can execute. Because at the end of the day, the investor is looking for a missionary, not a mercenary. A mercenary does things for the reward and for the money. But as a missionary, you're so passionate of the problem, you're willing to get out there and do what it takes. And that's what investors are looking for. Show them that mindset, the missionary execution-based mindset, and you're going to be just fine. There you have it. Watch some of these other videos that I'm going to have on the screen. I want to know what you think. And remember, you're not alone in this. If you're going to take this path, we're going to do it together. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Show me your progress. Let's do it together. I do it every day. Never going to tell you to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. As always, I appreciate your time. Thanks for hanging out with me. I will see you in the next video.